We all make mistakes, probably, several each day. But when your mistakes start ruining your life, most of us know that it's time to make a change, right? Most of us are not Anthony Weiner, the one-time Democratic congressman turned lying sexter, turned mayoral candidate, again turned lying sexter, and then finally turned convicted sex offender for doing dirty stuff with a 15-year-old girl online. For all of his remarkable lying and nasty behavior while married to a long-suffering wife, Anthony Weiner has today earned himself a bunk in a federal prison. And he'll be parking his business there for the better part of 2 years for transferring obscene material to a minor. That's kind of officially what you call it, but it was doing really dirty stuff with a kid. That's how the rest of us look at it. So it's hard time for the Weiner who chose the online moniker Carlos Danger. 21 months. And then another 3 years supervised release. He's going to have to register as a sex offender, which carries a huge long list of requirements in itself. Too much, do you think? Maybe not enough, do you think? We're talking to some of the women from Weiner's prior scandals in a moment, but first to CNN correspondent Jean Casares, who was in the courtroom this morning for the sentencing. So, Jean, how do you take it?
I saw so many emotions. I saw up and down. So I'm in the front row and I'm sort of on the side, so I really saw his face. And when he walked into the courtroom before the sentencing, I mean, he was nervous, jaw clenched, tight, continually. As his attorney was arguing for probation, when his attorney said his family sees him changing day by day, he started to cry. So that's when the emotion started. Yeah. And then he gave his own allocution, begging for mercy, and he cried.
Didn't he say something like, "This is my rock bottom"?
This is my rock bottom. I take it day by day. Every day I strive to make a new day. I am an addict. I took the hopes and dreams of my wife and just threw them away. But when the judge then was announcing the sentence, you never know where she's going. And it sounded like he was going to get probation because she was really applauding him for having individual counseling and group counseling. And I saw his expression change, and he was not so distraught anymore. And then she turns it and says, but deterrence is the main thing here. And you're high profile, and if anybody can learn from this and not do it, then there's a life stake.
You go into the slammer. You go into the slammer, bro. And maybe, if he'd had that happen to him at another time, it has spared a lot of people in his wake a lot of pain and suffering. But technically, he's a first offender because the other stuff he did was with consenting adults, and that's really immoral, given that he's married with a baby.
But he had scoring so high, it was higher than the 10-year maximum for the sentence.
By the way, I noticed no Uma. She has been pretty much there for him all along, including last week asking the judge to go easy. But today, no sign of her.
But she wrote a letter. She wrote a letter.
Big deal.
She wasn't there, right? But the judge said, I took all the letters very seriously. She said, I'm doing this for my son, and I want my son to not be hurt in all of this. So she was sort of asking for probation, but not asking for probation. I
just wonder why she wasn't there physically. She's been there at his side. Of course, they're separating. And then you see the sad clown face in the divorce hearing where they wanted to keep it anonymous, and the judge said no, which may have spawned that look. But she was not there for today.
Nope.
Hold on for a second, Gina. I have another question for you, but not before I want to introduce a couple of other people integrally involved in this story. Sydney Leathers. I know you know the name because she's one of the women who engaged in some of those very racy messages with Anthony Weiner. This was after the first scandal had cost him his job. He was using the alias Carlos Danger in their communications. Sydney's live with me from Evansville, Indiana. Sydney, thanks so much for being with me. I guess what's your reaction to all of it? You're not a minor. This was consenting. He was married. He was cheating. He was nasty. He'd already done that. He'd apologized. He begged us all for a second chance, and then he ended up with you. So now you're looking at him having done the third chance and ending up with a 15-year-old. How do you feel about today?
So I was 22 when I first started talking to him, and when I look back now, I just think of how naive and immature and just what an idiot I was at 22. So to think of how naive and immature you are at 15, it's just kind of mind-blowing. So he deserves prison time for what he did. She's a kid. So I'm glad he didn't just I'm glad he didn't just get probation, because I do think because he's a public figure, he does kind of need to be made an example of.
I think at one point, along this whole chain, not today, that's for sure, but he was sort of suggesting, well, come on, that 15-year-old was shopping a book out there. like a 15-year-old has any part in a sex act with a grown married man with a child. Whatever the 15-year-old does is not her fault. And that's just the law. You know, Sydney, it's just so frustrating to hear the blame game that goes on here. I want to play something, Sydney, because I watched that documentary, Weiner, where he had gone through his disaster and lost his congressional seat. He had to, you know, resign in shame after tweeting out his package, asked for forgiveness for everybody. And then 2 years later, it was revealed that a year prior, he'd been sexting with you. And all of it happened on camera while he was in the back of a car service, probably on his way to some mayoral event, because he was trying to run for mayor and like do the big comeback. And all of a sudden, his PR people are like, oh, guess what? Someone named Sydney Leathers has come up. So I want to just play that moment. Have a look.
I just want to look at the questions and talk to you about how you want to answer those. So the answer to were people in the campaign other than Huma aware? No. And had there been multiple online exchanges with multiple people, or was it just this one?
This was the last guy's template and put in his information.
Can I just say multiple people, or is it just this one?
I think you've got to. I mean, there was more than one, so I think we've got to answer the question. The problem was that the series of interviews that I did when I got in the race were after this. And people asked me, is the number still the same?
Exact address or not?
No, there's no exact address.
I think I said to 6 to Dominic, and then I cleaned it up in subsequent interviews because I knew that was a problem. The question is, do we answer it or not? I think we have to answer these questions.
I think we have to answer it because if somebody else comes out, we don't.
So, okay, so then you're going to give me the answer.
So I'm going to say
Yes.
So there he is at work, you know, that you can see the machine chugging around, just like it's chugged around 3 times when these things happen, Sydney. He actually ended up coming out and trying to just sort of put it all out there while still running for mayor. I mean, he was charging straight ahead for that job, even though you were a whole part of the zeitgeist at that point. And here is the press conference he gave about being responsible for it.
I'm responsible for this behavior that led us to be in this place, but in many ways, things are not that much different than they were yesterday. This behavior that I did was problematic, to say the least, destructive, to say the most, caused many stresses and strains in my marriage, but I'm pleased and blessed that she has given me a second chance.
No, Anthony, that was a 3rd chance, and you asked for a 4th. And poor Huma looks like she's in a hostage video at that point. When you watched all that, Sydney, like, knowing that you were a part of it, I mean, you're not blameless here because you were getting in with a married guy, but you certainly weren't doing what he was doing.
I was also a 22-year-old young woman, so sure, I'm not blameless, but I'm definitely not the villain I was made out to be in that documentary. You know, those people didn't even ask for my side of it. They don't talk about the fact that I was actually outed by BuzzFeed. I didn't want to be connected to the story at all. I was outed. So the documentary doesn't go into any of that. It just simply tries to vilify me. And it really hurt me because it came out several years after the scandal when I was getting ready to graduate from college. So, you know, I'm trying to move on.
Let's be really clear. There's nothing illegal about, you know, talking to someone online. Like, let's not vilify someone who didn't break the law here. Real quickly.
You have to understand that I got death threats. I got rape threats. And that all started up again because this documentary kind of reminded people of everything and really painted me in a very negative light. So,
it's unacceptable. I mean, it really is unacceptable. Real quick question. He keeps saying all the time that he's sick. He keeps saying, oh, I got a sickness, I got an illness, I got to get counseling, I've gone to therapy. What's your buy on that?
I think it's just a load of garbage. And you know, the funny thing is in these situations, no one ever makes allowances for a woman and says, oh, she's a sex addict. It's only the men that ever get to use that as an excuse is one thing I find really amusing about these situations. You know, I've never once heard anyone use that for a woman. No one said, hey, maybe Sydney's a sex addict. You know, that was never something that was used for me, you know, to kind of make an excuse for me. It's only something that's used for powerful men, really. So I just think it's garbage.
So he tried to do the same thing to you that he did to the 15-year-old by suggesting to everybody, well, the 15-year-old was out there shopping a book, and this was probably a a whole conspiracy against me. He pulled the same thing with you, didn't he?
Yeah, and I actually think he might have been behind me being outed. He actually released the 15-year-old's identity to several outlets, and I think he might have been the one that gave BuzzFeed my identity, because initially I had given stuff anonymously, and he obviously knew it was me giving that anonymous information, and I think he wanted to punish me, and I think he wanted to ruin my life. And you know, I mean, I contemplated suicide when BuzzFeed outed me. It was a really serious thing to me. I wasn't some fame whore that wanted to be attached to this. It really, really impacted my life and changed my life, and wasn't necessarily a positive thing for me. I don't think anyone wants that kind of fame. That's not fame. That's infamy, and that's not something I would know people that would go.
You don't deserve to have threats made, you know, online. Hold on one second, Sydney. I want to bring in Lisa Weiss, if I can. She also exchanged explicit messages on Facebook with Anthony Weiner. That was back in 2011. He was still a congressman back then. She joins me now, Lisa, from Las Vegas. Lisa, thanks so much for being with me. So I mean, you defended him for so long, and then when did that change?
Oh, goodness sakes. I feel very stupid for defending him. I defended him at the beginning when he was doing his perversions with consenting adults like myself, and I didn't feel victimized. Of course, it was wrong because he was married. However, the minute that I saw he used his son in a photo, and I believe the quote was, he used his son as a chick magnet. He lost me there. I thought that was demented and sick. When I found out that he knew that this girl was 15 years old and she does not have the legal or psychological ability to consent to the perversions in which he was asking her to engage, that was it. I mean, I'm sorry. The moment I gave him the benefit of the doubt for a minute, I thought maybe she looks a little bit more mature. Maybe he didn't know. No, he knew.
He did.
She told him I am 15 years old.
He knew.
That's a sex crime.
So Lisa, well, it certainly was, and he's a sex offender now, and he has to register. I do want to ask you a couple of things, because I think, you know, a lot of people, if they haven't sort of dug down into the dirty nitty-gritty of this story, they may not know exactly what he was up to. So I just want to, if I can, and I had to really sanitize so I could get a couple of these texts that he sent you. I'm going to start off with this one from September 25th, 2010. He says, where did my favorite dirty Facebooker go? I'm getting kind of addicted to you. And then he said in April of 2010, he said, I keep going back to your page looking for new pics to get off to. And then in March of 2010, he said, you will surely make noise when I take you blank. I will tell you how your blank feels. So, Lisa, this is honestly nothing compared to what happened between the 15-year-old and Anthony. It wasn't sexting. The prosecutors were clear. It was video conferencing and watching and encouraging her to masturbate and do things that a 15-year-old girl should not be doing at the behest of a grown man on a video. So when you look at sort of the conversation... That's my question. When you look at the conversations you had and you know what she was doing, can you sort of figure out anything about how a 15-year-old girl would come out of this?
I can't imagine. And for me, honestly, you know, my initial conversations with him were, I just wanted to just talk politics with him. I know his MO. What he does is he changes every conversation. It slowly becomes something dirty. And as I was a 40-year-old woman at the time, and I didn't know exactly how to extricate myself diplomatically from this situation. So, you know, I'd never spoken to anyone online or, you know, text in this fashion, but he sort of grooms you. And he encourages you. You feel like you have to say something back to him because it's what he wants to hear, and he's someone that I was a fan of. And I'm sure with this young girl, you know, it's like classic pedophilia grooming with her. I'm sure it started the same way, and I'm sure that she didn't know how to get out of this.
It went on, you know, it went on for quite a while. So, I mean, I think you all sort of have an inside seat and, you know, a ringside seat as well to this circus that was Anthony Weiner. And who knows if the 2 years that he'll be put away is going to make a change. I do want to thank you, Lisa. It's not easy to come forward and talk about this stuff. I mean, I know you've just been dragged through the mud a lot. I want to say the same to Sydney Leathers. Sydney, I want to thank you as well.
Yeah, I think we both have.
You guys have had a rough go. I mean, like I said, you're not completely blameless. You were knowingly, conversing with a married man, but I mean, you were not putting your 4-year-old child in a nudie photo, calling your kid a chick maggot. And I just want to say one more thing, and I want to bring Gene in this quickly as I send us to break. If anybody thinks he's going to Club Fed, you know, like the campground of federal detentions, it's not necessarily going to be that way. They actually incorporate your medical background. They incorporate your psychological and mental health needs. And if he has been professing that he has a sickness and needs counseling, he may have just sealed his own fate. Because if the minimum security Fed institution can't provide that kind of counseling, you go where they can. It could be a medium. He could have a tougher go at all of this because he himself has brought that up in his defense, and it may end up sealing his fate into another institution. But there you go. There's the Anthony Weiner Show right there, folks. My thanks to Jean Casares and all her amazing work at the courthouse today, and my guests as well, Sydney Leathers and Lisa Weiss.